Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses, and in this video we're going to be discussing the Song of Solomon and Proverbs, taken from the Student's Monthly Letter by Manly P. Hall, September 1937. Song of Solomon. There is no part of the Old Testament more difficult to interpret than the Song of Songs, which is Solomon. The modern clergy evade this issue, and there has been considerable controversy as to the justification of this book being included among the scriptures. In truth, there is no work more deeply mystical, more profoundly symbolic. It is generally believed that the Song of Solomon was written about 1,000 years before the beginning of the Christian era. In terms, its symbols and its figures are strange to the modern world, but for the lover of deep and hidden lore, this brief book is incalculably rich. The alchemists of the Middle Ages declared that the Song of Solomon contained the whole secret of the manufacture of artificial gold. Its 8 chapters represented the steps in the purification, calcination, and projection of the philosopher's stone. We know the alchemists were really mystical philosophers, but concealed their metaphysics from a cruel and unbelieving world. Gold means soul power. The philosopher's stone is wisdom. Therefore, the secret of wisdom and the perfection of the soul must be concealed in that book which was anciently called the Canonicals. In a very curious and ancient manuscript relating to the transmutation of metals and other alchemist and mystical processes, the base metal which is going to be transmuted into a spiritual stone is described in Solomon 1:5. In the old symbols, the black earth or rebus is always represented as a dark untinctured mass. The two principles involved in the perfection of the stone, that is, the dual forces which are to accomplish the purification of the elements, are described in chapter 2 verse 1. The sublimation begins in chapter 2 verse 4. The alchemical fire by which the elements are to be tested, chapter 2 verse 7. And chapter 4 verse 16. The purification of death before the resurrection of the elements is described in chapter 3 verse 1. The sublimation or distillation of the universal elixir in chapter 3 verse 6. The coagulation and change of color, chapter 6 verse 9 to 14 inclusive. This tells the colors the elements pass through in the making of the stone. The fixation of crystallization of the stone is described in chapter 2 verse 12 and chapter 8 verse 4. The manipulation of the elements is described in chapter 6 verse 7. The augmentation and final projection of the stone is explained in chapter 8 verse 8 and through to the end of the chapter. This means that in the work is a formula cleverly concealed, meaningless to the uninitiated but a great moment to the informed. It is believed that the first verse of the second chapter of the Song of Solomon, I am the rose of Sharon and the lily of the valleys, is the origin of the Rosicrucian symbolism of the rose and lily. This verse appears upon many alchemic plates and symbols, but is never interpreted for the profane. The rose and the lily are the symbols of love and wisdom, and these must be well understood before the molten sea of the adept can be cast. In the Song of Solomon, there are 2 characters, Solomon, the king, and the mysterious dark princess. We have already explained the meaning of Solomon, how this king symbolizes the sovereign intelligence of the world. He was the wisest of all kings, and his wisdom endured forever. He is the personification of divine power and divine authority. The Black Princess reminds us of the Black Ishtar, the Black Diana of Ephesus, the Black Melita, the Black Virgin of the early European Christians. She is the hidden mother, the Black Isis, Sophie, mother of the mysteries. In substance, she is the mother of the gods, to whom Julian the Empire addressed his hymns of praise. The dark mother is called by the Greeks the womb of night, the darkness in the midst of which shines the light power. Solomon in all his glory. The Song of Songs, therefore, is the story of creation. It is a mystical description of the sun and the earth. For the earth is indeed the dark mother, coat like you, the dark earth mother of the Aztecs. The masters of the Kabbalah explained deeply into the story of Solomon and the dark earth mother. Their findings were in substance as follows. All things manifest themselves from a mysterious obscurity. The origin of life is concealed. The end of life is concealed. The visible world is rounded with the darkness, with origins and ultimates hidden from mortal perception. The Egyptians termed the mysterious veil, which hides the superphysical from the physical, the veil of Isis. The Alexandrian Hermetics called this veil the thrice deep darkness, for in it are concealed three things: the mystery of life, the mystery of thought, and the mystery of feeling. The Babylonians made Ishtar their principal goddess, the daughter of Sin, the god of the moon, the lighter of the night. All this symbolism teaches us that we are to understand an ancient philosophy to the effect that the true source of all things is called the mother or matrix. From this darkness emerges all living things, progeny of night. So Hesiod called night the mother of the gods. This night or darkness is infinitely related to light. Day and night follow themselves, the eternal alternation. Day is Solomon. Night is the dark goddess. There is a fine Hindu fable to illustrate this. Shiva, the sun, falls in love with Parvati, the daughter of Himalaya, the god of the mountains. The god Shiva comes to Parvati. The sun god Shiva comes to court Parvati. When he meets the mountains of the western sky at sunset, for a moment he rides upon the mountaintops, for the great bull Nandi is the earth. From this union of Shiva, the sun, and Parvati, the sunset, is born Kali, the goddess of night, worshipped throughout India as the black daughter of the sun. Thus we see that the black goddess represents not destruction or evil, but merely the dark origin of things. We find this again in the Gnostic systems where the Virgin Sophie, or wisdom, becomes the heroine of strange and curious fables. It was from the Gnostics that the troubadours, or wandering musicians of the Middle Ages, had their origin. The troubadours were the sweet singers of songs, and they always sang of a mystical and unknown woman, the Virgin of the world. These sonnets soon came to be regarded as merely love songs, but in their origin they were mystical hymns of adoration to the Mother of the world. Dante and Beatrice, the dark woman of Shakespeare's sonnets, are both statements of the same myth, rooted in history, but not significant as history. The spirit of man is regarded as a luminous principle, perfect in wisdom, the origin of the life in man. This spirit, descending into dark bodies, achieves through the chemistry of experience the mysterious power that is called soul. The Virgin of the world is soul, in the universe the world soul, in man the human soul. The soul is the dark princess. This we find clearly stated in the book of Revelation, where Jerusalem, adorned as a bride, comes down out of heaven adorned for her husband. Chapter 21, verse 2, the dark princess is the bride of the Lamb. It is the soul born out of the body, possessing within itself no light but reflecting the light of the Spirit. Let us think then in these terms. Man, having perfected his material evolution and having reached that condition of spiritual development in which he becomes aware of his own divine nature, yearns to be united forever with the spiritual truth and reality that are the very substance of himself. The great Sri Ramakrishna taught that the truth of all things was the Great Mother. He taught of God in the terms of the Mother of all life. When he ended his meditation, he passed into a state of ecstasies. He wrote many books describing his understanding of spiritual reality. His words are not so different from those contained in the Song of Songs. Soul crying for real, the spiritual self reaching down to embrace its lower nature and lift it up into one with itself. This is the mystery of the Song of Songs. The old rabbis knew the secret of lifting up of self. They realized that this secret had been strangely but beautifully concealed in the Song of Solomon. Proverbs. The book of Proverbs is attributed to Solomon and should be understood as reflecting the wisdom and culture of Israel at that time. The difficulty we have today is the lamentably bad translations of these scriptural books. All the subtlety of the originals vanished centuries ago, leaving a mass of material still interesting, but lacking a certain vitality. We may use one example to summarize the entire situation. In chapter 1 verse 7, it reads, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge." Now technically and philosophically speaking, this is untrue, for we are taught to love the Lord, our God, and love and fear cannot abide together. So we wonder what might originally have been intended. By examining the oldest traditions available, we learn that this verse says that the sod is for the Chassidim. Now the word sod has been translated fear of the Lord, but the actual word has no such meaning. Sod means an assemblage. It may mean technically a group of initiated priests, and by rational extension the doctrines or teachings of such a group in its large sense. Therefore sod means the wisdom of the initiate or the esoteric doctrine. But this does not mean the fear of the Lord. Now the Chassidim were priests who had been accepted as disciples or initiates into all of the ancient mysteries. This is a restatement of another verse in the scriptures which says, "The wisdom of God is for those who fear him." These two verses have identical meaning. Let us therefore say for Proverbs 1:7, the esoteric doctrine is the beginning of wisdom, or the esoteric doctrine is for those who have been accepted into the mysteries. These are indeed the true sayings referred to in verse 6, the hidden teachings. But what does this mean to the average Bible student? This enthusiastic jot and tittle worshiper will insist that the words of the King James Version are the very words of God himself. The beginning of blasphemy is to doubt the wisdom of that decrepit group of old men who made the translation. Time and time again, you run against these mistakes, and every statement contained in the Bible should be checked with the Greek or Hebrew originals before any interpretation is derived therefrom. It does not necessarily follow that all of the translations are incorrect. A considerable part of Proverbs is devoted to a moral teaching, with special emphasis upon the desirability of wisdom. Solomon, the son of David, exhorts those who would be close to God to achieve wisdom. Of course, in his day, there were not great schools and libraries available to the people. To him, wisdom was the accumulated knowledge of his tribe, the law and tradition handed down from father to son. See chapter 1, verse 8. Thus the book of Proverbs is a strange contradiction to the most familiar teachings of modern Christianity. Solomon cries out that man must be wise. He invites those who love truth to incline their ears unto wisdom and apply their hearts to understanding. Yet in the New Testament, the emphasis is entirely upon faith. Solomon says of wisdom that she is more precious than rubies, and of all the things thou can desire are not to be compared unto her. Chapter 3 verse 15, Solomon also teaches that wisdom is found in ways of godliness. Only the man who seeks God can partake of wisdom. How different is this from our modern viewpoint? The modern scientist has rejected the inferences of religion. Atheism and agnosticism are rampant in the world. Men believe they can be wise without being good, but this can never happen, for wisdom and virtue are inseparably related. If modern thinkers would realize that deepness of understanding requires a spiritual perception, we would have less of war and struggling and conflict and more of the peace and serenity which are described in the book of Proverbs. What is wisdom? Wisdom is knowledge perfected through inward realization. Wisdom comes not out of books, nor does truth come out of books. Understanding and wisdom come from within man. They sanctify knowledge. They transmute and perfect education. They spiritualize thought and culture. Why was Plato a wise man, while some modern thinkers is only educated? The modern man may possess far more actual technical knowledge. He may not suffer from Aristotle's inability to number correctly the teeth in the human head. Yet the man who can number the teeth and split the atoms may be an ignorant man, while some Indian sage sitting under a banyan tree with none of this world's goods and no schooling may be a truly great man. If education could bestow wisdom, we would all be wise, but instead of this, we are foolish, filled with prejudices and conceits, incapable of even friendliness and honesty. It is therefore appropriate to meditate upon wisdom, even as Solomon meditated upon it. Wisdom is the most precious thing in the world. It bestows absolute security. It makes man one with the sovereign truth, which sustains the universe. Plato was a wise man because he transmuted knowledge into soul power. This great man, gentle and patient, too wise to be angry, too learned to be unjust, is a magnificent example of the breadth and depth the true wisdom bestows. A comparison between a modern science and Plato would be most humiliating for the modern scientist. He may know more, but he understands so little of what he knows, he has convinced himself that there is neither God nor reason in the universe. Therefore there is no truth, no wisdom within himself. Plato saw God in everything and communed with truth. The modern scientist sees God in nothing and may only commune with his conferers obsessed with similar unbelief. Solomon tells us something else in the Proverbs. He tells us that it is impossible to be wise without living in harmony with the divine plan. Only the soul that is gentle and filled with love of truth is capable of great learning, and no man can learn more than he himself is. Increase of knowledge infers increase of spiritual stature. As we grow in integrity, we become capable of greater knowledge. In another place, Proverbs chapter 9 verse 1, Solomon writes, "Wisdom hath builded her house, she hath hewn out her 7 pillars." And what are the 7 pillars of wisdom? They are the 7 laws which sustain the universe. They are the 7 aspects of the real. It is true that wisdom hath builded her house, and her house is the universe, and has not that power which builded it the wisdom to sustain it. Man immersed in wisdom is still foolish. Surrounded everywhere by the evidences of truth, he is still ignorant and perverse. In the presence of the mystery of life, he lives not at all. Proverbs also tells us that the wicked man cannot flourish. Chapter 11 verse 5 reads, "The righteousness of the perfect shall direct his way, but the wicked shall fall by his own wickedness." The whole world desires to be happy. It desires security and peace. It longs for green pastures, but happiness must be earned. The stupid, the foolish, and the selfish can never be happy. Any man who departs from wisdom departs from peace. A man who clings to the evil in him must suffer for his decision. It appears in this world that the evils flourish, but if we examine closely into their lives, we shall see sorrow, misery, sickness, and death. The law forbids that any man who is not intrinsically good shall enjoy either wisdom or peace. Although the Proverbs are attributed to Solomon, no man knows for certain by whom they were written, but whoever he was, the author of these verses was indeed a wise man. He was a master of the mysteries of life, and adept of secret schools. In chapter 12 verse 28 he says, "In the way of righteousness is life, and in the pathway thereof there is no death." This is indeed the teachings of the mysteries of the sacred temples of Eleusis and Sais. Immortality is the reward of wisdom, not immortality in the sense of perpetuation of the physical body with its infirmities, but rather a conscious participation in eternal life. The wise man perceives the law, obeys it, and his inner life is perfected. Our modern dictators might profit by the verse, "Better it is to be of a humble spirit with the lowly than to divide the spoil with the proud." Man lives a little time in this world and departs into the unknown from whence he came. This life is indeed an antechamber of eternity. How little we appreciate the impermanence of our physical existence. How seldom we look beyond this life. Perceiving only this physical existence, we live wholly for the day, ignoring and refusing to consider our eternal existence. But time brings to all things the rewards of action. Each person, in the end, comes to that which is his own. We may regret the seemingly injustice of life, but there is a mighty honesty in space, and all men and their deeds shall finally come to their just deserts. The student of the Christian Bible will do very well to consider the sacred books of other nations. It is also important for the biblical student to have the religious literature of the world ever available to him. He soon realizes from the study of comparative religion that the scriptures of various peoples have a common origin and a common purpose. Not one of these scriptural books is complete in itself. Each is derived from the writings and customs of several racial doctrines. Religious intolerance must be overcome by all sincere truth seekers. The age of bigotry has passed. Evolving humanity demands and deserves a more tolerant religious perspective. We like to feel that the sincere students have outgrown an intolerant addiction to any sect or creed. On the other hand, it is impossible for man to function normally without some spiritual guidance. Our present international chaos is due to the failure of idealism in the affairs of men. This failure is due, at least in part, to religion itself. That is, what we call religion. It is due to the intolerance of sects and innumerable superstitions that have foisted upon a gullible humanity. The commercialism of religion is greatly to be deplored, but is inevitable under existing world conditions. To the average Christian, the Old Testament is a book of history, bad and garbled, a history ridden with intolerance and cruelty. But so are the Vedas of India, the Quran of Muhammad, the Zendavesta of the Persians. The greatest of the Indian classics, the Bhagavad Gita, is the story of a war of brothers. Krishna comes to Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. The wars of scripture, the massacres, and the captivities are all symbolic. They all represent the great battle of life itself. In the Nordic myths, we have the battle between the gods and the demons on the plains of Asgard that ended finally in the destruction of the world. It seems incredible to any intelligent person that any sane man or woman could have accepted literally the spiritual significance of the Old Testament's war and carnage. Yet millions of people today live by the jot and tittle of such literalism. This the sincere student must definitely avoid. He must search for the divine mystery in all things, and discovering the true keys to the scriptures must apply them, not only to the book, but to the mystical art of living itself. Yours sincerely, Manly P. Hall. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment. And please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. We need your help. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description below. Thank you very much.